Good morning, everybody. My name's Anna Town, and I look after business development services across Asia Pacific at Cushman and Wakefield. And it's my very great pleasure to be your MC today for our webinar that's specifically focused on the Singapore market. What we're going to do today is have a discussion around what the new normal looks like for occupiers of both office and industrial space in this wonderfully global city of Singapore. And it's a very important day for Singapore today. Clearly, the 19th of June as we enter phase 2 of reopening, which sees social gatherings of 5 people allowed, retail outlets opening up, dining opportunities happening. And I hope that for those of you who are in Singapore, you've got dinner plans for tonight. We really couldn't have picked a better day to talk about the future of Singapore real estate markets. And that's, as I said, what we want to focus on today. What does the future look like? What is this new normal that we've been talking about? And what are some of the strategies that we can share around how corporates are planning for the future? Just to run you through the format for today, we're going to have a quick presentation from Christine Lee, who heads our research and business development services function across Southeast Asia. She's going to talk us through the macroeconomic picture, some of those forces that are shaping the real estate markets, how that's impacting across asset classes in commercial real estate, what some of the big trends are that are going to impact our sector post-COVID, and where she sees some of the key opportunities. And we've left lots of time for Q&A with our panel of experts, which you can see on the screen now. And hopefully you can see at the top right-hand corner of your screen a little button or box which has a question mark in it, and we'd love for you to put your questions in there for the panel to answer as we move through that Q&A session. So as you can see, we've got some great speakers today. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to introduce them, if I may. First off, Erwin Chong, who heads corporate real estate and the administration teams at DBS Bank, which means that Erwin looks after 4.1 million square feet of retail branches, electronic banking lobbies and offices globally. A very impressive portfolio. But perhaps more importantly, Erwin believes that corporate real estate should focus on the employee experience that delivers the most value to any company. And so I'm really interested to hear from Erwin about how he believes perhaps we need to adapt or tweak that employee experience in the new normal. And Erwin also has more than 20 years of experience in the industry and sits on the board of Cornet Global. Next, I'd like to introduce Yao Xin, who is the General Manager for International Product and Business at Alibaba Cloud. Now, for those of you that don't know, Gartner ranked Alibaba Cloud as the leading public cloud provider in APAC in 2018. And as the product and business leader, Yao leads several teams to build global products and drive international business growth. A little bit of background that I'd love to share. Yao describes himself as a tinkerer at heart and delights in figuring out how things work under the hood. and he built his first 486 computer when the internet was still running on BBS and dial-up. So I'm getting the sense that he's a bit of a pioneer, which is perfect for our discussion on the future. Some of our own Cushman and Wakefield talent, I mentioned Christine Lee, who heads research and business development services across Southeast Asia. Christine's a leading personality in the industry. You might have seen her appear on Channel News Asia, Business Times, Straits Times, the list goes on. Interestingly, she began her career as a property correspondent, and she's very comfortable both in front of or behind the camera. Christine always has something interesting to say, and she's going to take us through the presentation to kick off the webinar. Next, we have Mark Lampart, who's our Regional Head of Tenant Representation based in Singapore. And despite 17 years in Singapore acting on behalf of tenants, you will hear that Mark still has a very strong Canadian accent. But in that time being away from home, he's concluded over 500 transactions in the Singapore market across 10 million square feet of space. So very well qualified as well. And as well as having a Canadian passport, he's got an Australian one too. So Mark's a very international personality, and we look forward to hearing from him. Last but not least, Brenda Ong leads our industrial and logistics business in Singapore. She's recently joined Cushman and Wakefield, and we're extremely happy to have her on board. Brenda has more than 20 years of experience working with Singapore's leading industrialists and logistics occupiers and investors. She has a long and proud history in the industry, and she originally followed her dad into real estate. But we think her timing's pretty awesome coming across to Cushman and Wakefield, where we're seeing Singapore and Southeast Asia compete as a leading destination for industrial and logistics operations globally. So that was a little bit of a longer introduction, but I just wanted to, share a little bit of background of those people that you're going to hear from today. With that, I'm going to pass over to Christine to start the presentation.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this CNW webinar. I'm very happy to walk you through the research presentation, which consists of 3 parts. First, the impact of COVID-19 and the CIE implications over the short to medium term. And then we will look at the long-term features affecting the real estate, and finally, some key takeaways for you. So people are not just concerned about recession, but how deep it is going to be and what shape of the recovery we are looking at. So IMF is projecting a 6% contraction for Singapore in 2020. This is the worst on record since our independence. And the chart on the right, as you can see, this illustrates how things were progressively getting worse before and after COVID forecast. And you can see over a span of just 6 months, Singapore is amongst the worst hit by COVID in APAC, just second after India. So this prompted our government to announce 4 budgets in a span of just 3 months, giving out 93 billion to mitigate the impact of the business and the jobs. That is about 20% of our GDP. So a really expensive crisis indeed. And the recovery trajectory, if I may borrow a quote from my colleague John Sears, who heads the research for Australia and New Zealand, who said that the recovery could even look like a Greek letter mu, basically a combination of V and U. That means a sharp drop in April and May because of the lockdowns, followed by a bounce over June and July as we go through stages of reopening, and then a period of relatively soft growth until an effective vaccine is readily available. So the table outlines our house views on various asset classes and how they are impacted. And you can see that on the extreme end of the spectrum, we saw hospitality being the hardest hit because of the travel curbs. And in fact, S&P, the agency for rating, even predicts that the aviation industry can only return to normalcy in 2024. That's a really long way to go. On the other hand, retail is also hit hard because tourists in Singapore make up about 20% of the retail sales. So today, if you're walking in the malls, I'm sure the crowd is probably a lot thinner, especially along Orchard Road. And if you look at impact on office, it's probably going to take a while longer to be apparent because we see that the office market was actually at the peak before it entered this recession. And we do expect rents to soften this year by about 10%, followed by more declines next year. For industrial and logistics, as well as residential, these two sectors are actually more resilient in the current climate. So next, I would like to have a quick snapshot on the office market in terms of demand supply dynamics. So office market, although it was at the peak of the market, it was not in a relatively strong position when we entered COVID because rents only rose by 2.8% in 2019 and bulk of the gain was actually in Q1 last year. And starting this year, we saw rents have already softened by about 0.5%, although it's not a big drop, but we are expecting more to come in the second quarter. Some quick note on the take-up rate, and as you can see, overall it is negative, although in the Grade A CBD we saw some tiny bit of overall take-up. This negative absorption is likely to persist. And current vacancy rate, again, is very, very low for office market, especially for the Grade A CBD, but the trend is likely to reverse in the coming quarters. If you look at the supply side, we see bulk of the CBD supply coming on stream only in 2022, and there is limited supply, especially in the CBD if you compare with the annual average over the past 5 years. So on the rental front, you can see that city fringe and suburban, they are going to be more resilient, and because of a low base effect, and also the gap is going to narrow going forward. So against this backdrop, we see 3 issues. High, because the office market is usually very highly correlated with the state of the economy. So recession will definitely have an impact on the companies, and that will result in companies downsizing or probably exit the market altogether. And leasing demand is going to plummet. Landlords will have to give in. So some of the actions taken by the occupiers, I guess, is probably good news for them. They can actually look at leverage on this soft rental cycle to negotiate more favorable terms with the landlord. And they can also adopt a flexible leasing strategy, perhaps tapping onto our co-working and private offices to respond quickly when circumstances change in either direction. And also they can include a pre-termination clause. This is to allow them to give up spaces in event that an effective vaccine cannot be developed or the economic contract will last longer than expected. The second issue is social distancing. And with that, we are going to have, please go back one slide. There is a need to have more effective collaboration. So ineffective collaboration is what we have seen during the social distancing mode. So perhaps one action is that we have to make sure people will be able to connect and collaborate safely. And return, we are also probably going to see more cubicle styles returning to the office because of social distancing, and more meeting rooms, and perhaps an increased size for the meeting rooms. So the third issue is remote working, which can be a potential game changer. And we know that because of that, we have lower demand for physical space. And some of the actions we can look at, perhaps, during these trying times, is to look at possible footprint reduction and also achieve some real estate savings. But this is also very important to invest in people now to make sure they can work well remotely. So meaning to look after the well-being and also the corporate culture to make sure these people still feel affiliated with the company. And finally, we see the flexible spaces in decentralized locations are probably going to be a sweet spot for remote working. And that's also why we think that rental differential between Marina Bay and other submarkets are going to narrow going forward. So at CNW, we have pioneered this social distancing office concept. It's called the 6 Feet Office, and this place is in Sydney. So the concept rests on two cornerstones. One is to keep a safe distance of at least 6 feet. The other one is to have enhanced sanitary measures. So you can see from the office layout, it's pretty spacious to keep a distance between individuals, and it starts at the entrance to the building. You also can see floor markings to help direct the employees' movement around the building or the office. And we also prefer one-way traffic in the clockwise direction. And also for the shared workstations, we have those one-off desktop paper pads, which you can throw away at the end of the day. Next, you can see this is a quick snapshot on the industrial property market. And again, I think rental trend is on the decline. So in the first quarter, we saw that there is quite a lot of negative absorption as well, which is similar to the situation in the office sector. Vacancy rates will trend up, but if you look at what happens in the logistics space, and because of the e-commerce story, we do expect that logistics space is going to be very, very resilient due to stockpiling. And if you look at the overall pipeline, the supply is still ample, but mainly in the factory space. So for BP and warehouses, the supply is actually waning, and there will be less pressure on the rents. Therefore, if you look at the rental projection for industrial, we only expect a rental decline of 1 to 4% this year, depending on the kind of market segment you are looking at. Again, we have three issues related to the impact on industrial. So although the sector is more resilient, because of the low trade volume globally, this is going to be worrying if it's going to be an extended period. Because of the lockdowns, you can see that consumers basically spend a lot less. I was actually quite happy looking at my own credit card statements over the last 2 months because I didn't spend much. This will actually have a knock-on effect on the external demand, which is not good for the industrial space. So some of the industrialists probably will have to look at space reduction, reduce their footprints, and that will lead to an increase in the shadow space. So what some of the actions industrialists can take in this current market, they can seek lower cost options, or they can negotiate leases to lock down rents at a more attractive rental rate. Social distancing, again, is a factor in the industrial space. And you can see that factories are not able to operate at maximum capacity. And that also is shortage of workers. Again, if you have a reduced capacity, perhaps you can make that up with an increasing number of shifts, which can also lead to higher labor cost and utility cost. So some of the actions, if you want to contain the cost pressure, is actually through automation and also use of the robots. We are also going to see negotiations for maybe discounted rates for after-hour utility usage. But the silver lining is that we saw the surge in e-commerce and data usage during this period, and we definitely will see higher demand for warehouses, distribution centers, cold storage facilities, and food kitchens. So there will also be higher demand for co-location data center space. So some of the actions occupiers might consider is to refresh the older logistics properties to keep up with the new technology to meet the new demand. And occupiers may also consider investing in CapEx to refresh older equipment when they move the data centers out of existing office buildings. So now let's move on to the longer term post-COVID trends, which can become a more permanent feature going into the next decade. So how sustainable is work from home? Cushman and Wakefield actually surveyed 40,000 people worldwide to find out. So through our bespoke experience per square foot database, which has collected 4 million data points before and after COVID, we have the answers for you. So overall workplace experience is still relatively unchanged before and after the work from home experiment, and but the drivers for this experiment is already changed quite dramatically. So some of the key learnings you can see on the screen. Employees are definitely productive anywhere, not just in the office. In fact, the survey shows that 75% of the respondents feel productive when they need to focus. And acceleration is going to happen for flexibility and choice to work anywhere. And you can see, according to all the respondents, 73% feels that companies should embrace flexible working policies. And that brings us to the new normal going forward, which will be a total workplace ecosystem. That's basically saying, 50% of the workforce work across office, home, and the third place. But there are also challenges on the personal connection, and some of the other challenges include, internet connectivity. So perhaps this can be an issue that companies can look at. Perhaps you can also, fresh up the home infrastructure, maybe on the company's expense if the company is doing well. The next growth sectors, next slide, please. We are actually seeing from this this whole lockdown and pandemic is that biomedical and internet economy is here to stay. So interestingly, you look at the manufacturing output for biomedical manufacturing, it's up 100% in April 2020. And if you look at the stock prices of the biomedical companies, healthcare equipment suppliers, you will be surprised that I just screened through the stock exchange Singapore. For pharmaceutical companies, the stock prices is up 29% year to date on average. And for the healthcare equipment and supplies, it's up a whooping 237% just on the Singapore Stock Exchange. Some may think that this is a short-term thing, but I reckon that it's here to stay. If you recall, after the 9/11 terrorist attack, you can see that security and screening equipment has become the permanent feature. And I think we have underinvested in healthcare for a few decades. And some of you might have come across, the TED Talk by Bill Gates, who actually predicted in 2015 the next crisis will be a pandemic. And he also urged the governments around the world to increase spending on healthcare and R&D to combat this pandemic. So he was pretty spot on. And I think as a result of this, medical spending will accelerate, and we are going to see more hospital beds, medical equipment, facilities, to cater to greater healthcare needs, and that will present opportunities in the biomedical sector. And there's also another growth sector, that's the internet economy. Be it the cloud kitchen, the delivery, or the Netflix, or the online gaming, they will all be here to stay, and they will continue to boom. So in summary, we see 5 mega trends that's going to shape the real estate landscape over the next decade. Building obsolescence is going to accelerate, and that's going to result in lots of flexibility and mixed-use development across all real estate segments. And there will be more AEI and redevelopment to make buildings smarter. Real estate agility, I can't emphasize more on that. Short-term contracts are here to stay. And we will also see in the industrial space that sharing of the machineries, eventually it will lead to Industry 4.0. And AI, although I think we have sidetracked from this artificial intelligence trend because of the COVID, but it has started to replace workforce at accelerated pace. A case in point is that a software company actually did a little competition with the lawyers to go through the NDAs. And the result is just that machines are just faster and better than the human lawyers. So they are going to shape the future workforce, and perhaps, you know, we will see more companies forming, but smaller spatial requirements by per company because of the reduction in the headcount. We are also going to see demographic windfall. Basically, countries who are with younger and larger population will be better positioned to capture the outsourcing growth. That is why I think our Singapore government has always been encouraging people to have more babies, because we're going to lose out to countries like Southeast Asia and India. The last point is war for talent. I think I can't emphasize this more. Top talents today are very, very mobile, and they are now even more accessible because of technology and the work from home trend. So employers will have to provide them a holistic package in order to attract and retain these talents. And for countries who do not have a large package, they will have to do more placemaking to basically attract these talents. For example, like Singapore, we have to make our environment, built environment, very, very suitable for these top talents. Okay, next, I will just summarize the key takeaways. So for occupiers, you can see the work from home trend will be part of the ecosystem. So it's an important offering for hidden talent pool. Just like what Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg mentioned, you know, they are going to have a lot more talent pool from all these places where it's not away from the big cities. And there is also the emphasis on health and wellness in the workplace. So think about disinfectant policies, training of cleaning staff, and touchless technology. There will also be a huge focus on cost containment while navigating through the new normal. So occupiers will explore strategies for real estate cost savings. And investing in technology is also very important to make remote working easier for employees. And we also have the use of flexible space as a hedge against uncertainties. And finally, you can also protect yourself from future lockdowns with pandemic clauses. Next. For large occupiers, you can see 2020 saw the convergence of three key events which negatively impacted the demand for real estate. So COVID-19, a global lockdown crisis, and also the slowdown of the flexible space expansion. Although the new supply in the Singapore Grade A CBD remains tight, the market is turning increasingly tenant favorable. So that's also because of the surge in the secondary and shadow space due to companies downsizing. So no one really knows how things will pan out, but the second half of 2020 will be exciting and will be the litmus test for the resilience of the real estate market. So for large occupiers, there is really no better time than now to start this conversation and engage with our stakeholders, be it your employees or your HR, your C-suites, your real estate consultants like Cushman and Wakefield. So with this, I will start my highlight of today's webinar is really our panel discussion with our 4 subject matter experts whom Anna introduced earlier at the beginning of the webinar. So they will be sharing insights on a range of topics concerning the real estate recovery and the future workplace trend from occupiers' perspective. We have Erwin from DBS, who has done a fantastic job in transforming spaces through workplace transformation program called Joy Space. And we will also hear about the exciting growth trajectory and the success stories of tech companies who have been the market darling. And Yao will share with us because he used to work in the Silicon Valley for more than a decade before he joined Alibaba to be based in Singapore. So let's hear from the horse's mouth on what's the future in store for these tech companies and the implications on real estate. Last but not least, we have our tenant rep expert, Mark Lampard, and industrial and logistic guru, Brenda On, to share with you how they are coping with the pandemic and their new course of strategies for occupiers in the office and industrial space. We will be answering questions from the Q&A icon on your screen, so please submit your questions. And let me just begin the panel discussion with Erwin. Hi, Erwin.
Yeah. Hi.
So what are some of the key lessons learned from the pandemic as a CRE head?
Well, of course, when we were all facing this, I think most of us probably didn't realize this was something we had to do in our resume. Obviously, in most of our previous past, we always had to take care of a lot of, let's just say disasters and, natural stuff. And we have good health and safety programs up there. But I think none of us were prepared for this unprecedented scale of this pandemic, where everything was happening everywhere and almost all at the same time, right? So obviously the challenges were a lot. The first I would say is the need to jump right into the fire. I would liken the situation like raiding your troops for war, and literally just call the button and hopefully they all arrive and tool up and figure out what they need to do. I think the challenge was really trying to keep up with the many things that we didn't know about the pandemic in the very early days. What was really happening, who could get it, simple things like cleaning and all that started to become something that we had to ramp up quite easily. And then of course there were all sorts of new technologies, new ways of fighting it that we had to look at and build. I think the biggest learning I can think of is the readiness of the team being able to really build on the capabilities they always had and just ramp it up 10x. So the protection, the safe distancing. I would say that even in the bank, we were doing a lot of safe distancing measures like advanced contact tracing. We already put in a lot of effort to try to distance people already. We were sending a lot more people home. We were much earlier than, say, whatever the government was coming up with, only because we knew we had to do something in our pandemic plans. We were already prepared in a sense, take that out and then really dive into how we will fight this COVID battle. I think the last thing I would say from a preparedness perspective is also the willingness for people to jump into the fire to sort of really help. The frontliners that we all had in our company, including the people that we partner with, whether that be cleaners, security guards, the facility management team, everyone was really willing to help and come right in and to really be on the front line, trying to fight this enemy that nobody knew. So that was really heartening. And of course, the whole company coming together right after that, on the back of that, to really help push everything else. So another key learning is the close connection that the CRE team had with the HR folks, our security folks, everyone from business continuity, and obviously the C-suite in trying to really drive the response that we had.
Thanks, Erwin. Yeah, it's really a lot of firefighting, and I guess it takes the whole company, the connection. So Yao, how is working from home exercise for you and your team? Understand that in China, people don't usually work remotely. And what were some of the immediate challenges you had to overcome when there was a lockdown? Hi, Yao. Okay, I think maybe some technical issue. Let me just move on to Mark. Mark, let me direct this. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can go ahead. Hi, Yao. Okay, maybe we will go to Mark first. Mark, can I just hear from you, or what have you been hearing from your clients on their pain points during the COVID period now? How is your team gearing up to support the business and making decisions about their real estate requirement?
Sure. So I think probably that, we've been going through very much a phased evolution of what our clients have been asking us for. So, Singapore is very much an international city, and real estate decisions are made locally, but they're also made in lots of instances by people who are in other places, US, Europe, or otherwise. So the first thing that we had when the pandemic evolved was, what are the government regulations? Because we had, CREs who are in different parts of the world, and they're looking at what are the regulations in Vietnam, what are they looking at Philippines, what are they looking at Singapore. So the first thing they had to understand is what can, what it can't do, and that was kind of the first phase. The second one was the government was very fast and very proactive in terms of supporting the economy and also supporting tenants. And with the stimulus measures that were put in place, it really prompted then our clients and tenants to saying, okay, so what does that mean to us? Or what are we going to receive? And that then prompted a further question is, what other avenues are available for cash flow assistance? So that was kind of phase two. Then we kind of slipped into a little bit of a normalcy for a short period of time. And the questions were asked is, well, how do I keep my business moving forward while my staff are working from home? Because lots of people have never worked in this environment, and it was definitely different. So they're trying to understand, can work still get done? Are they being productive? And now it's interesting that we're into phase 4 in this evolution. And today is people are saying, well, how do I get my staff back? Knowing the regulations, the implications, and the safety distancing requirements, how can I get them back safely? So that's what we're going through, and all this leads to where we are now. And these are the questions that we're getting is, what is their businesses going to look like? What's going to look like in the short term and the medium term? Because every day is different, and they're having real problems in terms of forecasting what that looks like. And this is where we really start to help out. And so this is what we've been spending a lot of time doing is, first of all, helping them understand what their leases are and what their structures are. Can they sublease? Can they assign? Can you implement force majeure? Then trying to help them understand about what solutions may exist in terms of working from home strategies and so forth. But the biggest thing that everybody's now looking for, and you talked about it in your presentation, is helping them increase flexibility. helping them understand, okay, fine, I don't and I can't make long-term commitments anymore because I don't see where my business is going to be. I can't forecast with confidence. So I need some degree of flexibility. And by the way, I can't, necessarily increase my cash to do so. So this is the evolution that we've been going through over the last little while, and how I've been helping clients right now.
Right, thanks, Mark. Let's try to get Yao online again. How is the working from home exercise for you and your team? Because people in China don't really work remotely. What were some of the immediate challenges you had to overcome when there was a lockdown? Okay, looks like we still can't get. Okay, just bear with us for a while. I think he's dialing back in. Or maybe in the meantime, Erwin, do you want to jump in with some answers?
Sure. I mean, just to keep everything going along, I think for the bank, I think we're maybe to turn the question a little bit to relevance with the bank. I guess from a general perspective, banks were not very heavy users of remote working. Some people probably understand the reason why, because we are a bank. There's a lot of customer sensitivity. A lot of our teams, obviously manage a lot of customer information. Not being, being prudent about protecting that is not really going to be good for any bank, for that matter, right? So from our perspective, we've always been a little bit more cautious about what kind of information can be used or brought back within our team. So primarily that was the main driver as to why not that many, I think, banks adopted a work from home policy. But of course, with the pandemic, everything changed, and a lot of things had to be looked at in a different way, and different lenses were applied, and also obviously be able to keep the company going. As you would know, DBS being a big bank in Singapore, specifically Singapore, we were considered an essential service. So we had to really dig deep and figure out what are the areas and balance out, the need for safety to keep our people safe and healthy. But on the other hand, we also had to make sure that we kept the operations going, and therefore, putting some people behind and back in the workplace. Was already back in the home, was still something that we sought after. But we succeeded through a mix of technology and various different risk and control measures that we put in. We were able to actually successfully put almost 80% of our people back home, and keep them there, actually, to be honest. And they're still working in that kind of level of percentage right now. And to me, that's the true remarkable story behind this. Out of adversity, we found new ways, new methods to make sure that we kept the bank going, and still supported the company, supported the economy as well at the same time, and still give, the loans that we gave out to SMEs, all the relief measures that the government wanted to put in. All of that was done with almost 80% of the bank working from, people's homes. So it's quite remarkable when you think about that shift from, like, say, almost, let's just say, close to very low levels of percentage of people remote working to 80%.
Right, thanks, Erwin. Yeah, definitely a lot of challenges bringing people back to work. And maybe I go to Brenda. You know that industrial properties are quite resilient during the pandemic. Does it mean it's still business as usual for you?
Thanks, Christine. Okay, indeed, industrial actually has turned out to be one of the more or most resilient sectors in these unprecedented times. But I would say it is still not across the board on all asset class within industrial. In logistics is the star performer. We see logistics as a star performer with rising demand from stockpiling needs, which benefited 3PL operators, as well as boosting warehouse demand from the logistic landlords, which actually caused quite a fair bit of supply crunch lately. I would say business park tends to trend closely to the office sector, as working from home may become a new norm in the future, as we were all discussing earlier. Coupled with uncertainties in the economic outlook, we are now seeing more companies reducing footprints and looking for replacement tenants to reduce real estate costs. High-end manufacturing cluster like electronics and semiconductor, we do see them likely outperforming during these COVID times. We are still seeing needs and demands from this sector looking for space for expansion. The last sector would be the manufacturers in the food business, and as well as the packaging businesses. They have also benefited with the lockdown, forcing consumers to turn to online purchase.
Thanks, Brenda. Okay, let's try Yao again. Yao, are you online now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Okay, a lot of tech companies, are campus-like. So do you actually foresee this trend amongst those in Silicon Valley to continue to look for large physical regional hubs like they are campus-like?
I do think so, because a lot of these companies, when you cite somebody overseas, when you start building up a regional presence, you want to keep growing on the back of that regional presence, right? It's a lot more productive when you pack everybody into a kind of the same campus, and then they kind of walk back and forth. They can talk to each other. They can just cross to another building and have a meeting. That from a productivity point of view, which is basically what a lot of tech companies think about. They would want to do that rather than split people up into too many small teams. Despite the fact that everyone is very used to working remotely, everyone is very used to video conferences. Still nothing beats a whiteboard that you can draw on. I can tell you, I get really frustrated now because sometimes I can't just draw the whiteboard and explain what I'm trying to do.
You think 5G will not change the story?
I think so it comes down to this. Technology is just enabling, right? So it's really more about how used to working remotely are we. And we do see some changes from that front, right? Which is the fact that if you look at a lot of startups in the Valley right now, so I was just chatting with a friend the other day, and their startup is about 100 people. They are quote unquote headquartered in San Francisco, but half the people don't work in San Francisco, right? So they have 50 people who are spread across the US who are working from their kitchen or working from their home, and they see them only once or twice a year when they come in for company outside or something like that. And then this is kind of a very, very normal thing in the startup world in the US right now. But I think what you see is that in a lot of places, if they have a choice, they would actually pack the people into the same office and give them the luxury, give them the choice of okay, you can work from home 2 days a week, 3 days a week. It doesn't really matter. But you also have the choice of coming in and working together, right? Technology doesn't, if you look at cloud, you look at 5G. 5G is about faster, right? Lower latency, right? Faster speed. If you look at cloud, it's been with us for 15 years. It doesn't dramatically change any of that, right? It's what we are seeing is actually more of a change that has really been happening for 100 years, right? Which is that we move out from manufacturing era, and manufacturing requires everybody to show up 9 to 5, because if you don't show up, the supply chain don't show up together on time, the supply chain can't run, right? But when you can work remotely, and with all the video conferencing tools that's been with us for the last 10, 20, 30 years, that trend has really been started. This doesn't really dramatically change it. Of course, with COVID-19, people are more used to it. But I think people would also want the physical presence to work together and talk together, and kind of that social element is still very important. Being in the same room working together is still very productive. I know that sounds very counterintuitive for people who don't work in the tech industry, but even for developers, right? Your idea of a developer is someone who put on a headset, likes to work together. There are times that the developers like to work together in the same room, because they can all like jam up ideas together, like, and they can all solve problems together. Like a lot of times when I was at Twitter, we needed to come up with what we call a tiger team to, start running a project. We literally asked the guys to go into a meeting room, and then they are basically stuck in the meeting room for 2 weeks, right? And then all they do is focus and talk to each other and brainstorm about what they need to do and how to solve the problem and write the code together. And that's very, very productive, right? We actually fly people in to do that instead of asking people from other parts of the country or other parts of the world to kind of do that remotely. So it speaks to the power of in-person collaboration, which I think it goes away, right? Despite all the technology, it just gives us a lot more flexibility to choose other means of working together when we have to, when we need to, when we can. Just a way of doing other things.
Thanks, Yao. I think that's a very comprehensive answer, and it sort of surprises us because we thought all technology folks can actually work from home, but actually he gave us his perspective that whiteboard is essential. Okay, I think there's a question for Erwin. DBS already has a large footprint in Singapore, and how would you see the new norm in flex working on a permanent basis, and what more work from home or more work from WeWork type of spaces?
I think that's an interesting question. Probably won't be able to spill the beans to everything that we do in a real estate strategy. I think I'll preface a few things. First is, we are looking very strongly at our footprint and not just here in Singapore, but everywhere else, right? I mean, as any CRE would be, there will always be opportunities to look at what kind of changes that we can have with our footprint. As you already mentioned, it's a good time now to look at as an occupier to really look at your footprint and study them and figure out what it is. But to answer the direct question, I guess the question is mainly, are we going to continue to have lots of people working from home? Are we going to get a reduction of space for that result, or are we going to put those people in, say, more flexible strategies? I think, in my own opinion, we will probably look at all of those three strategies. We have to balance that. You have to really apply a lens on which country you're talking about this strategy to be. Specific to Singapore, Singapore is not a very large place. To be honest, west end to east end, what is it? A car ride is probably 35-40 minutes at most, right? Of course, if you take the MRT, you'll take it a lot longer. But when you start thinking about this as a problem across a lot of other countries that have bad traffic, Jakarta, for example, that's when you start to realize that, hey, maybe we should not really be putting everything in the CBD. So I think my view is that we will probably have to relook at all of the strategies that Cushman kind of laid out, right? Whether that be decentralized more, whether that be spreading our people across various kind of flexible arrangements, because some people might want to work from home for a few days a week, perhaps, or even long term. And then how do you support them when they need to access collaboration? Want to celebrate with their team whenever they've things they want to come together. How do you breed innovation and come together into spaces? So we probably have to think about the long-term effects of people away from the company, and how do we provide solutions for that. But I think back to the point, having your office or a location, it's a mark of branding. It's a mark of this is our company, and a lot of companies, including big tech companies, have prided themselves with very good offices and very good facilities and amenities for their staff. So I'm not quite sure that all will go away. So I guess in the simple sense, it might be well spread out across all these three new forming strategies. But I can only guess that a lot of flexibility will be required for any CRE, whether that's large or small, because of the changing landscape of business, more than just COVID, if you really look at it. And maybe this COVID issue just tipped this over to the scale where there's a need for that kind of ready, flexible spaces for companies to grow quickly and nimbly and reduce when they don't have to. But on the other hand, build towards probably, hopefully, a more flexible real estate solution.
Thanks, Erwin. There's a question. I think, Mark, you are the perfect candidate to answer that. What are the panelists' thoughts on co-working companies, Regis, WeWork, etc.? And they have been globally smashed with COVID. But with work from home now a viable option, do they have a strong future?
I think definitely yes. When you gave your presentation, you talked about a number of the forces that were going on, in terms of flexibility, in terms of health of the facilities, and so forth. But one of the ones that wasn't treated was, capital investment or capex for fit outs. And there's been some really interesting projections from CEOs and even, all of our clients who are saying, look, capex is on moratorium right now. And that's one of the fundamental advantages that the co-working providers, do is they say, look, we will provide you the physical environment. We will give you the flexible solution. So if you look at the two biggest pain points, is no capex. Why do things on a short-term basis? Because they know what their business plans are. It can't help but actually draw them to that solution. Now there's definitely problems with it, but the co-workers will evolve. The co-working model is based upon density. We're going to put a lot of people in, and that's how they're going to make their margins. The problem is that we've got social distancing, so that starts to go in the face of it. But those pain points aren't going to go away, and that's why I still think there's going to be a huge opportunity for it.
Maybe Mark and I just chime in a little bit. I think one other aspect is the location of co-working companies. I think primarily we've always seen them sprout within the CBD naturally, and it becomes always a natural incubator kind of space, kind of big companies, small companies, startups, and that ecosystem has always been very strong for them. I think, but the problem with the fact that if we decentralize or shift people more across everywhere, the question is, are we going to have a small little shop house WeWork in Pasir Ris, for example? I'm not quite sure that may happen in, say, maybe Singapore, but probably some of the other large cities, Shanghai, Jakarta, and this whole evolution of a decentralized co-working kind of operation. It might actually pan out. I mean, I believe some of the other companies at Regis were toying with this at one time, but they even put workstations in libraries and stuff. So it's probably a nice think of why that would be the case. And if I would venture why that would be useful, not everyone has a nice little study at home, or not everyone has enough space at their house. What if they're living in a 5 people apartment with 4 other people working with 4 other companies? Everyone on conference calls might be a little bit messy in the house, I think. And maybe that's why going to an alternative location just to do focused work might actually be something that co-working operators can actually capitalize on.
There's one other point, and this kind of goes to Yao's comment earlier, is that people want to connect, and there's a certain amount of identification and personal branding to their companies. If I choose to work with you, I'm embodying your personality and your ethos, and you want to share that with your colleagues. You want to share that in being an environment that reinforces that. So people want to get together, and the natural draw is people want to be in the CBD. There's more things to do. There's more people to connect with. So I think there will be a drive to still having that in the CBD, but in markets where there's logistic challenges, being in the periphery is definitely going to be a solution.
Yes, I agree. I think Yao probably can come in because his company Alibaba just bought the headquarters in the CBD. I mean, they can go anywhere, Punggol or Jurong Innovation District. Why CBD, Yao?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay. So let me chime in a little bit from 2 perspectives. So I'll answer your question, but let me talk a little bit about the co-working space part. So Twilio, when I was at Twilio and setting up Asia, Twilio was actually one of the first tenants at WeWork, right? And if you look at the WeWork press release in Singapore, you see them mention Twilio. It's interesting because from a tech company global expansion point of view, especially for smaller companies, right? Not companies the size of Alibaba, Google, or Facebook, but smaller tech companies. The international expansion always starts with one person. And then you don't really know how fast that expansion would be. And so a lot of times the co-working spaces actually give you a lot of flexibility. Because I remember for I think the first 3 years, my teams were very frustrated because they kept having to move office, but moving office was like half a day of that. Like, pack up your computer, pack up your monitor, let's move over to this other room, right, across another like street, right, which is actually very helpful because we could just expand very nimbly, right? It started with 1, and then we expanded out of 5 people. We need to get to a bigger space. We expanded some more. We needed this bigger space, and the expansion is very unpredictable because you don't really know how fast the business will go at the very beginning. You could be doubling people, or you could be holding off on hiring anybody, right? Because it's very hard to say. And co-working space gives you a lot of that flexibility. So basically, when I was at Twilio, every location internationally when we started was a co-working space, and I don't think that will go away. That flexibility is very, very powerful. So coming back to your question, Christine, on the CBD, when Alibaba bought a place in CBD, I can't actually quite speak for the company because I'm not responsible for any of the office location, but I can make a guess, right? If you ask me personally, I think it's a great choice, like for me, for a lot of people, right? Because from a personal point of view, it's much easier whether you live in the east or north or west side of Singapore, or of course in the central, it's very convenient. But if you live, on the outskirts of the island, it's much easier to get to CBD, to get to work, and that is a very powerful motivator for you to hire talent, right? Because a lot of times when you hire, we talk about war for talent, right? Which is one of the things you identify as a key trend. And that's a very, very powerful trend globally, in Singapore or in the rest of the world, right? And what happens is that when you want to hire talent, you want to make sure that you remove any blockers that might inhibit them from wanting to join your company, right? So let's say if we happen to, let's take the extreme case, like let's suppose we are in Changi Business Park, or we're in Jurong Island, right? And they are like, and we're trying to convince somebody to come work for us. And this guy have like 5 different offers from 5 different companies. Location of the office will be definitely on his mind, right? And he wants to be somewhere where he can go out for a drink after, he can hang out with his friends, it's easy to catch up with friends after work. And the CBD is almost definitely the choice, right? And so from that consideration, it makes a lot of sense for Alibaba to be in the CBD area, just from a talent, grabbing kind of situation, talent hiring kind of situation. And you see the same thing play out everywhere. So like in the valley, like for the last few years, there's a very clear, distinct trend where the new graduates who come to the valley, they all love to live in San Francisco, right? So they don't want to live in Mountain View where Google is. They don't want to live in like Menlo Park where Facebook is. They don't want to live in Cupertino where Apple is. Like if you look at it, I'm not sure if any of you have been there, but if you've been there, it's a date town at night, right? And if you are 20-something, you don't want to be at a place where it's a date town at night. And so they live in San Francisco, and they can get away with it because the company will actually make special accommodations to have like buses running from San Francisco down to Menlo Park, down to Cupertino, down to Wakefield, and it's a 1 hour, 30 minutes bus ride, right, to come down, just so that they can convince these guys who insist on staying in San Francisco to come, work at Google or Facebook or Apple, right? And all these companies, especially Google, I think someone told me if you look along the Embarcadero along One Market Street, there's basically a Google office in every one of the buildings except for one building at the Lincoln Center. And the company actually started offices in San Francisco to accommodate to these young 20-somethings who they are trying to hire, right? And speaks to that very, very powerful war for talent that's all going on right now, right? That companies will do a lot to accommodate them. They will even like set up office in San Francisco or in downtown to make sure that they remove the location parameter as a consideration among these talents.
Thanks, Yao. I think perhaps we will take one question from the audience who asked about the new normal. How do you see companies able to engage their employees for good employee experience in the company?
Maybe I'll I'll chip in and see if I can answer that question. I think most companies should have already been focusing on people. I think DBS has always prided itself with a people-first strategy. We do care a lot for our employees, and even during the COVID time, even my own first priority was how do I protect every single person that we have in the company. A lot of times, there are so many rules and everything else that we have to abide by, but I've always encouraged people to think beyond the rules. It's the reason why we're doing this is actually to protect each and every one of you, right? So from a COVID response, that's always been strong, but there's no difference. The reason why we are focused on employees is because we focus on customers. We've always had a very customer-centered approach in our building of our products, be it digital, be it whatever even we do from a physical standpoint. And naturally that flowed on to us taking care of our employees as well and really put them first. So I think a few strategies would be required. One is obviously, in order to really drive better employee experience, you do need to pick data. You need to figure out how you understand them. So I won't be surprised with the advent of what has happened with COVID. There may be an opportunity to increase digital penetration in the use of employee apps to sort of make things faster, easier for them so they know. I think it's going to be very important to keep that kind of level of interactivity, especially when you have larger swaths of people who could be remote, who are working from different places. They will still need to figure out, a simple thing, right? Do I have a desk when I come in to work tomorrow? Do I have a space? Where do I go to get a team together? You almost immediately think without some form of technology tool, it would be kind of difficult to do that. Apart from everybody saying, hey, WhatsApp, and let's meet under the tree next to the pantry or whatever. So you almost think that will probably be something that will happen, and the new normal will approach that in that way. I think the other one is to uncover what employees will want to do in the office if they are not otherwise working remotely or working anywhere else, right? So what are you going to do? So I think that requires a lot of experimenting. Obviously, there'll be a bunch of people who will always be in the office. But when your teams come together, what will you do? Is it to collaborate? Is it to celebrate? Is it to build teams? Is it to work on important projects together, and so on and so forth? I think this whole if I know tech company, DBS is partially like one. We have a lot of agile teams that have always prided itself with the whiteboarding and being able to get around and post-it notes everywhere. The question is probably difficult to recreate that in the same way as what Yao was saying. But the point is, what are they going to do? And if you know what they're going to do, then could you improve the experience? Could you make your employee feel special, right? And to think in a deeper way, it changes the mix of what's in the office. I mean, could I not have a coffee shop cafeteria that is right out there in an open area? Everybody can get a coffee, sit down, have a drink, have a snack, even have lunch even, whilst you're whiteboarding away. So you can start to reimagine the space that you have internally to sort of flex out what you believe environments can change to help build a better employee experience. Because I would say the difference in the future would be if you are working at home, that's your work, right? When you come to the office, it's now become a destination. In the past, it used to be, I just got to come here, right? So tomorrow, the office could be, hey, I can come back to the office. I'm going to do something special and different today. Will that psyche stick on? Not quite sure. But, if we make the spaces special, they might actually think that way.
Thanks, Erwin.
I actually, just to pipe in, I very much agree with that last statement. It's destination. So I was jealous to see this panelist or panel, as most of you are actually in the office and I'm at home today. I wanted to be in the office. So that's definitely a change in emotion and attitudes on it.
That's interesting. Okay, Brenda, maybe just take this question because you also deal a lot with first-tier tech companies in your course of work, and many of them are e-commerce giants. So could you share with us what are some of the recent trends and due to this global supply chain shock during the pandemic?
Okay, I wouldn't say it's really just the e-commerce giants on the lookout for logistic facilities. My observation is that there are a few other industries actually driving the demand, and we can see it coming from a few sources. Of course, the one that is really very prominent will then be the government-led efforts to safeguard the potential disruptions to supply chain, and they have actually instructed distributors of essential products to boost the stockpile for basic necessities, which are like rice, mask, sanitizer, PPE, and so on. Other than that, the closure of retail outlets also fueled the demand for consumers buying goods online and to deliver to their homes. So this does drove e-commerce players and distributors to store more products in warehouse. Supermarket chains and distributor of dry groceries and frozen food are also seen to be storing more stock, which actually increase the demand for cold store facilities, which already is quite limited in Singapore right now. At the same time, other than just warehouses, we're also seeing companies steering away their dependence on their manufacturing plant in China after this COVID-19 evolved, which affected a lot of company supply chain. So we are seeing companies on the lookout to move their plant either to Singapore or even to Southeast Asia.
Thanks, Brenda. Okay, last question of the day. In the interest of time, if you can use one word to predict what the second half of 2020 will hold for the real estate sector, what will it be? Maybe let's start with Yao.
The word I would pick is probably uncertainty. Like you're going into this, I don't know, this year has been just a year of like, I don't know what is happening with the world right now kind of feeling. Of course, we have COVID, which threw a lot of things into uncertainty. And then I don't know if people still remember when we were going into COVID, there was oil shock and the oil price went negative. Crude oil prices went negative. That's unheard of, right? And then on the back of that, you had all the protests across America and people fighting for Black Lives Matter, which is a very important issue, right? BLM. And that happened. That's still ongoing. That's still happening across America. I see it across my Twitter feed all the time. And then more recently, a few days back, a friend in India sent me a link and it was showing like India and China having border skirmish, right? At a time when the world is already in a lot of upheaval. So it's like looking at all these and then you look at the stock chart, right? Everything suggests that it should go south, but the Fed started printing a lot of money and then it starts going up and it's still going up. And I look at all this and the one thing that comes to mind is I have no idea what is going on, right? And there's this huge sense of uncertainty that is just looming over my head.
Okay, interesting uncertainty. What about Erwin?
I'm almost tempted to use a phrase rather than a word. I read this somewhere. Can you reboot 2020, please? It's got a virus in it. But I'll take the word from it and say, hey, reboot. Why do I say reboot? That word means that we have a chance to really look at things in a different way. I think COVID has represented a lot of opportunity, even down to simple things like managerial growth and leadership, where people can actually take this chance to really show that they're heroes and build on this whole fact that we are a caring person or a caring company. You can take that fairly far, if you want to say that, we want to care for everyone. So it's a reboot for a lot of managers, a lot of leadership, and people to stand and say, hey, we could make a difference and stand for something else in that sense. But specific to the real estate industry, it is probably a time to reboot as well, where things may not have worked in the past. Whether that be safe distancing, measures that you have placed in your office, maybe you need to rethink a different way of doing things. There is a lot of opportunity in figuring out new business modes, new productivity measures to try to drive that within the the space. But I think on the larger scale, in the landlord community, there's also a question on this board about what landlords may need to do. I think there's a need to think about, hey, don't look at this just as everything's going downhill. maybe this is a chance to reboot your relationships with your tenants, build stronger ones, come across to look at different kind of solutions that you can work together, mold together to actually drive a better change for tomorrow. So I think my view, don't just while it all away and say COVID has destroyed everything. I think there are definitely a lot of glass half full opportunities out there. The question is, how can you take hold of that? And if you're daring to go into that new normal, if you're faster and the first to go, you might actually stand out to be the winner.
Thanks, Erwin. Yeah, we have to rethink real estate altogether. What about Mark? What's your word?
Exciting. That may sound a little bit awkward to people, but there's so much negativity that we're seeing right now, and I like to have a positive outlook in almost everything. And questions that were being asked previously weren't even being considered. Now everything is on the table. Humans by nature are not susceptible to change very well. And now we've got an environment that actually is forcing change at such a speed, and because of consequences, it's exciting, because people say, I have to consider this, I should consider this. Actually, whereas previously they just even wouldn't. So I love solving problems. And so I think it's an unbelievably exciting time to be in real estate and work with companies, because the solutions that are going to happen right now will be some of the most dynamic that I'll ever experienced in my career.
Brenda, what is your word?
Okay. Well, like what Mark said, he's a very exciting and also positive. My word will then be cautious. But although I'm still relatively positive of the industrial landscape, which is, which is seen as one of the more resilient one, but we will still see other industries that will be affected by this COVID. So for example, clients that are now faced with higher cost of operations as a result of the measures, weakened supply and demand due to the global containment measures, economic recession, and so on, they will all result in lower manufacturing output. So with this, actually, we see more potential closure and reduction in the scale of operations. And, some of the companies may continue to reduce footprints and to seek lower costs. So, more buildings may be up for sale and so on. So, and space may be up for pre-termination. So I would say the overall outlook will still be very cautious for most companies. Main objective will probably be cost containment, I would say.
Thanks, Brenda. I think for me, I will also pay vigilant, because it's going to be a new normal with a lot of uncertainties, and we continue to be on the lookout for red flags and also opportunities. So we have come to the end of this panel discussion, and a big thank you to all our panelists today for your views, and also everyone who dialed in. Back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Christine. I'll just wrap up really quickly. That was a wonderful discussion with lots of dynamic dialogue and questions. A couple of takeaways for me. I think flexibility was the word of the webinar, and Mark said that capital constraints and that challenge around not being able to forecast too far ahead is really the most common pain points of occupiers in Singapore. And Erwin spoke to some of the flexible arrangements that he felt would be put in place, be it in corporate headquarters or across a decentralised sort of workplace portfolio. I think, really interesting discussion about the role of the office in the future and what is that role. Again, Erwin sort of commented about how we need to challenge ourselves to reimagine space, to build a better employee experience and really position that office as a destination. I love that word. Think about what can we do that's special and different in the office versus what we do at home. And Yao also said that even tech gurus need the whiteboard and want to connect, and spoke about the importance of that CBD location to Alibaba as a means for attracting and retaining talent. So yeah, wonderful discussion. We didn't quite get through all the questions. We'll get back to you on those and send out a summary and a recording. And I think just to finish, I love the one word to describe the second half of 2020. I jotted them down as uncertainty, reboot, exciting, cautious, and vigilant, which similarities and differences across them. I'm going to add mine to it, which I hope the second half is going to be memorable. I think it will be memorable. I don't think we're going to forget the lockdowns. We won't forget the hand sanitizer, the social distancing, and even the toilet paper crisis of 2020. But we won't also forget all the interesting conversations that we've had about real estate, interesting conversations about workplace and the role of the office in the future. I think never before has the spotlight been on our industry, and I think we'll look back at 2020 as a pretty pivotal year in our sector's history. So again, thank you so much to Erwin, to Yao, to Christine, to Brenda and Mark for a really interesting discussion, and thank you to everybody for attending the session. That's a wrap.